Welcome to the Pacey Performance Podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Head of Athletic Performance at Australian Women's Rugby Sevens, Craig Twentyman. Thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So delighted to get Craig Twentyman out of bed this morning at 6 o'clock in the morning Sydney time and have him join us on the podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Craig.
Thanks, Rob.
It's great to have you, mate. So would you be able to just give us a little bit of a background on you and your background from your education point of view and maybe what you're currently doing at the minute?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from New Zealand originally. I've been in Australia for sort of 14 years now, so a fair while. I did a Bachelor of Physical Education at Otago Uni, and then sort of started to look overseas. Me and my then girlfriend, but now wife, we sort of decided to move over to Australia as a way of maybe sort of moving on to the UK and doing the old OE, but we sort of stayed here and got work, and I did a Master's in Sport and Exercise Science at Sydney Uni, and then, a few jobs along, ended up with the ARU, which was a bit of a conflict initially, but it's a great organisation, no matter what the press says at times, and I've been with them for sort of 10 years now, working across different programs, initially starting with the sort of younger development sort of groups they have coming through school-age kids, but now with the women's sevens since we centralised 3 years ago. So it's been a good time with the ARU.
So you've obviously kind of the Olympics has calmed down a little bit now, obviously off the back of it, everyone kind of gets on with their life. But
that's right. I mean,
go on, mate.
Yep. I was just saying there was the reason that we centralised was the Olympics. That was the ultimate goal. So to be successful there, it was like really, amazing, pretty surreal, really. All that planning that went into it, and actually it all sort of panned out as we planned, which doesn't often happen in S&C, as you know. And you go from the highs of that back into the daily grind, and it took a while for some of the athletes to get back into that. But as a whole, most of them have just rolled their sleeves up and got back into work. Nothing stays sort of static in sevens for very long. The next tournament's just around the corner, so we're sort of building up to Dubai at the moment.
So what's the Olympics like from a head of department dealing with the kind of logistical side of things, travel, getting things sorted hotel wise? What's all that like as a practitioner?
Well,
been there?
Yeah, I mean, it's multifaceted, isn't it? You've got so much to consider. Obviously a lot of that logistical planning is taken out of our hands from a, finer point of view. But, considering the travel and, climatization and, getting into the time zones and plenty of time to make sure it doesn't affect your performance. And, we had a heat acclimatization sort of camp up in Darwin, probably 2 to 3 weeks prior to going. So we went up there and got temperatures which ended up being, warmer than what we actually experienced in Rio. But sort of covering off that side of things. And then we had a camp in a place called Portobello prior to actually going into the village. And that was for a week, and that was really good for just getting into the time zone and getting things going in Brazil, but not actually being in the bubble of the village. And then ultimately it was really good. We were the first 3 days of the Olympics, so we went in 4 days prior and did a bit of getting the busyness of it all out of the way, I guess, and then we were able to knuckle down for those 3 days and then really enjoy ourselves after that. But I think it was really sort of planned well from a whole department point of view, and it ended up working for us.
So what's the Olympic bubble like? How hard is it to keep kind of athletes' mind on the job in hand?
Well, it was surprisingly good from our point of view. Like, our athletes were sort of on task, and the first couple of days we were actually in the village, it was like people were wandering around everywhere and covering a fair amount of ground, because in the Olympic Village, it's a sprawling place. So we ended up not considering that initially. It was something that we hadn't considered, and luckily we had enough time to sort of think, oh shit, we're actually they're covering another sort of 3Ks a day on feet, just wandering around the village and walking to and from dinner and the dining hall. So we put a stop to that and got them all on the transport that rolls around the village at regular intervals, and managed to settle that side of things down. But until you're actually in that sort of environment, you don't, or if you've been there prior and had that experience prior, you don't, like, these are sort of finer points that you don't consider or sort of slip your mind to consider. So it was definitely a good learning experience as well. But seeing the other athletes around, like, it's pretty thrilling. But our athletes were pretty focused, so it was really good from that point of view.
Mm-hmm. So how long have you been working with the girls now?
3 years, since we sort of started to centralise towards the end of 2013, and then we actually centralised full time at the start of 2014. So
what were your first thoughts changing from working with males to working with females?
Well, during my time with the ARU prior, we'd run decentralised sort of camps-based sevens programs with both the men and the women. So I'd had experience with working with the girls sevens prior, leading into the World Cup in actually Dubai, I think it was, in 2009, which I actually won. So I'd had that experience previously, but I mean, initially, like, there was some changes happening at the ARU, and it was probably the most set in stone option available to me. So I definitely leapt at it. And at the same time, the head coach, it's still the head coach, Tim Walsh, started with them as well. So I could see that obviously he was going to run a good program. And I thought, this will be a good move for me. And obviously with that carrot of the Olympics, ultimately, it was a no-brainer in the end. So yeah, initially you think, oh, geez, how's it going to go working full time with girls? But they're an amazing group of girls, and it's definitely improved me as a coach working with female athletes.
In terms of what, Craig, what's developed and what's changed from your point of view?
Well, I think anyone that's worked with female athletes, in a full-time program, you realise that you need to be spot on with obviously your prescription of things, but also knowing why you're prescribing, because they will come at you with a million different questions about every single part of that program. So you need to know why you're doing it and be able to, back that up, not with your explanation, but, with a bit of grunt behind your explanation regarding, like the science as to why you do it, or the very specific reasoning, because they're at you for sure, keep you on your toes.
So from a kind of really practical prescription point of view, what's changed from that side of things?
Well, I just think underlying, like, all my programming prior was, the underlying component of it was a focus on strength and the main lifts and building a program around that. But especially with the girls, like, really working hard on their relative strength, especially lower body wise. Not only from a performance point of view, but like avoiding those injuries, especially around the knee and those other sort of issues that arise from girls potentially, not being exposed to high force sort of contact sports previously. So like we've had to really bulletproof them from an overall strength point of view, so they can handle the high running demands of sevens, but also like that contact side of things that previously that they'd had no exposure to.
So when it comes to especially the ACL, obviously, that you mentioned there, what kind of specific work are you doing for prevention of that with the girls?
Well, a big focus on squatting strength, relative and absolute, but obviously we're always chasing a relative squat strength of sort of 1.8 to 2 times body weight, and the group that went to Rio had an average squat strength of 1.8 times body weight. So always working on that, building that, but also just the general hamstring strength side of things, and not only related to ACL sort of injury prevention, but that tolerating those high speed running loads that are running sport like sevens, you're constantly sort of exposed to. So big focus on squat strength, deadlift strength, in general other hamstring sort of resilience and strength.
So when you're not in competition, what's your kind of weekly schedule look like?
So a big week for us, for example, like a normal big week, if you like, is 4 days. 4 days in, we've got 3 running days, and then 4 lifting days. When we first started, we were like the girls couldn't tolerate a lot of like high velocity sort of running. So we did a lot of like groundwork around their technique development from a like speed point of view, and then also a lot of like base grunt sort of hard conditioning running, if you like, because we couldn't get work rates solely from conditioning games. So we had to like balance those two sort of components out in the program. But because they couldn't tolerate a lot of high velocity running, we could sort of get away with training on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, with a day off in between those cluster blocks at the start and the end of the week. But now they're at a level where they can tolerate a lot of high velocity running. We've had to go to a Monday, Wednesday, Friday running day with a day off in between each to maintain the intensity, and to avoid those issues that started to sort of show the heads from a loading sort of point of view. So, tendinitis or tendinopathy, and other sort of stress related issues that started to pop up. And so that was the sort of basis of going to day on, day off pattern from an overall weekly point of view, just so we could sort of get some good work into them, but manage their loads appropriately.
So what would a Monday look like, if you wouldn't mind talking us through?
Yeah, so Monday we'll come in for a check-in at 7:30. That's where they'll do their daily monitoring stuff. Monday's a big running day for us, so we do your multi sort of position groin squeeze, general wellness stuff, and then they'll all have a hands-on check-off with the physio, get strapping done. We'll have a team meeting, and then we'll do our general PTP session, which is a prep to play or prep to perform session, which is generally 20 to 30 minutes. It's a circuit-based session around rolling, sort of some dynamic stretch sort of routine stuff that we do, and then just a little mini circuit of mini band sort of glute activation exercises, some sort of scap stabilization exercises, and just a little jump circuit just to prep them for the session. Training will be on at 10 o'clock. It'll generally go for 90 minutes. And then we'll have a recovery session, lunch, analysis, and then we'll be in the gym at about 2:30 and we'll roll through our big lower body. Actually, it's not like a big lower body day. It's a hybrid day, and it's generally when we squat, and then we'll bench and bench pull and do their individual accessories and power stuff around those main lifts as well.
So how's your gym session differ on a is it Wednesday and Friday you lift as well?
Yeah, that's right. So Wednesday we'll take the axial loading out. From a lower body point of view, we'll do a split squat, like front loaded split squat and a hip thrust with a dynamic upper body sort of circuit and any individual sort of top up, from a conditioning or a volume point of view, depending on their individual needs. And then a Friday, we'll do another heavy lower body, like a deadlift, whether it be a trap bar or a flat bar, and our other push-pull strength complex with the power and individual accessories built around that again. Deadlift on the Friday because we don't want when we were first starting, we played around with different days, and we found that especially with the deadlift going heavy, found that if we had it early in the week, it might impact on their subsequent running days, just from a lower back sort of general soreness point of view. So we put it on the Friday, so they've got those 2 days to recover.
So when you mention your PTP, how do you keep? This is one thing that I spoke to someone about recently, and it kind of reminded me when I watched some of the Premier League guys warm up yesterday.
Yep.
And how bored everyone looked prior to games. I know this obviously isn't prior to games, it's prior to practice. But how do you keep that fresh for the girls? Obviously, day in, day out. How do you keep them motivated in that session? How do you change it up? Do you change it up?
Yeah. So on the Wednesday when we don't have as much running, so Monday, Fridays are our big running days. So on a Wednesday, we'll take some components of that PTP out. We won't have the jump circuit. We'll take some of the other components of it out as well. So we change it from that point of view. I am to change that up, in line with their gym phases. So they generally sort of roll over a 4-week phase, depending on where we are in the season. But I'll try and change that PTP process up at the same time as well. So, they're constantly exposed to a slightly different sort of process. But then, they're in as a group, big group, they get the music going and have a bit of a laugh and that sort of thing, which is another, difference we have between the guys and the girls. Big focus on a bit of fun and joking around and a bit of dancing and all that sort of thing, which often doesn't pop up in male sort of teams or that I've worked with so far. So they make their own fun as well. So
do you get involved, Craig? You must get involved. They must rope you surely.
I love a dance. No, I try and be absent at those times. Let them do their thing.
How much with that kind of section of the day? How much do the girls dictate what they do?
How do you mean, at the start of the day? Or?
Yeah, sorry, the PTP part of the section of the day. How much do they dictate what happens? Is it all dictated to them, or do they have a bit of a say in what kind of things they do?
No, well, they've got a circuit or a process, written down, put on the map for them to follow through. So they'll follow those sort of components of what we do there, but they've got like a 20 to 30 minute block that they can spend as much or as little time, if you like, going through those processes, as long as they're covering everything off. So, I'm not like standing there like a dictator, saying, okay, change, because, that gets very boring for all involved. So sort of let them, take control of that side of things, as long as they're covering everything off that we need.
Just going to take a very quick break in the chat with Craig. So hope you enjoyed the first half. The second half includes chat around planning an Olympic cycle, which obviously Craig is very experienced in. Also, the conditioning side of things for rugby sevens. So for all you guys out there in team sports, that's really interesting little segment from Craig. So just before part 2 is underway, just want to thank Valve Performance, makers of the Nord board, for sponsoring the episode today. And just a little bit of news from my end. I know I mentioned a couple of weeks ago we had a new website coming. So the new website should be on its way within the next 10 days, 2 weeks. So probably back end of November to the start of December. So some really good stuff, hopefully, on that site, which kind of adds to the podcast side of things. So keep an eye out for that, and I will let you get back to part 2 with Craig. Hope you enjoy. So when it comes to, obviously, your plan is, obviously, there's steps in between this, but the main focus is Olympics every 4 years.
Yep.
Just want to talk to us a little bit about the kind of, obviously, you've just come off the back of one. So at what point are you starting to think about one, and what process do you go through when you actually start that plan?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, coming off the Olympics, we got a group back in that didn't go to Rio at the start of September. So essentially, like the Olympics is always at the forefront of your planning. Like we've started to bring some new girls into the program on trial basis. We had a tournament last weekend, just a domestic tournament here in Australia, the Central Coast tournament, and we ran 2 teams. Basically, we split our contracted group down the middle, those that were available to play, and then we built 2 teams around those contracted girls, and those 2 teams were made up of development girls, or girls that are on Scotty and Walshy's radars, from Queensland, around New South Wales, other parts of Australia, and we built 2 teams around the contracted girls and ran 2 teams at this tournament, and they ended up playing each other in the final, and it was a good way to see some of the next group that are coming through. We've got a tournament in Fiji next week, Oceania, and a few of our contracted girls aren't going, recovering from injury, or we want to make sure that they're right for Dubai. So again, we've brought 3 or 4 girls from this development group in that we'll send to Fiji and have a good look at how they perform on a bigger stage. And if you like, we've already started to plan for the next Olympics. It's a never-ending process, and the thing is, it's still such a developmental sport. You got to get these girls that you see promise in into a full-time program, relatively early on in the process to make sure that they develop at the rate required to reach where they need to be for the next Olympics.
So where's that kind of conveyor belt start to getting girls into the system?
Yes, so Queensland and New South Wales run very good development programs, and they've got groups that sort of that run in a couple of times a week at least, and we keep an eye on a few of those girls from both those programs. But Touch and OzTag are definitely very, very good sports that give athletes a 7 specific grounding, and especially catch pass skills and width of pass off both sides point of view, and just a game awareness point of view. In Australia here, we're very, very lucky to have those 2 sports as being such popular sports. And a lot of our top athletes, Caslick, Cherry, Quirk, Tonegato, they've all come from these Touch and OzTag backgrounds, and they were outstanding for us in Rio, and that's a big part of our talent ID and development process.
Mm-hmm. So with it, obviously a sport that is kind of so brutal physically, do you just want to talk to us a little bit about the kind of conditioning side of things? And what maybe revert back to the kind of weekly structure, and maybe what is included in that to kind of tick that box?
Yeah, sure. So when we first started, as I said, there was a big focus on just getting girls up to speed from a technical point of view, from an actual tolerating workload and work rate point of view. And initially, as I said, we couldn't just sort of base our training off conditioning games and that sort of thing. We had to have a large component of traditional running conditioning in the program, just so they were exposed to the work rates that they find in games. So as the program's gone, and to this point now, we can get a lot of really good work rate work done from our conditioning games, because the skill level of the athlete has improved so much. We still have your top ups and injections within your session of the traditional running conditioning, if you like, just to get those super maximal sort of work rates happening, the plus 200 meters a minute sort of thing. But we work on worst case scenarios based off 45, 60, 90 second intervals up to 2 minutes, which is a worst case scenario from a work without stoppage point of view in a game. And it's just all taken off GPS analysis of games data. But yeah, initially it was important to balance that. But now the game stuff, we can get work rates up to 200 meters a minute just from different sort of games conditioning. So the reliance on that more traditional running side of things is not as great as it was. A big kick in our program, if you like, came probably a year after we centralized. So after one full year, they started to tolerate a lot more high speed and repeat speed exposure. And it sort of really kicked them along from a tolerance point of view and actual performance point of view. We follow a simple and consistent philosophy. So key technical drills, especially around speed, and then consistency, just making sure that, especially the high velocity running, you're consistent with your exposure to it, and that high velocity being above sort of 85%. And even in tournament weeks, I'll make sure the girls cover off that higher speed running, just so they're constantly exposed to it. We do follow pretty closely that sort of acute to chronic workload that Tim Gabbett has researched and presents so well around the world at the moment with his talks, and just keep a close eye on that sort of thing from a daily and weekly loading point of view, just to make sure we avoid those sort of soft tissue and other issues that are constantly sort of in the background in a hard running field sport like sevens.
Mm-hmm. So what part does wrestling and kind of grappling, what part does that play in the program?
Yeah, so sorry, from the contact point of view, we do a lot of off the ground sort of conditioning work. So especially with the girls, we do a lot of traditional burpee work and reload work, which is that body specific off the ground stuff. But also just the process of getting down and getting up off the ground. It's a big part of our program, and wrestling is a big part of it. But we do lean towards exposing them to that conditioning in a contact games point of view, rather than your traditional sort of wrestling conditioning, if you like. Yeah. Just because the key technical points of the contact side of things for them is so important. We just need to constantly be reinforcing that. So the off the ground and the contact conditioning is a big part, a big component of our Wednesday session, if you like. It's like the primary focus of that session. So at least once a week, they're getting a good hit of that side of things. And then around the other running days, they're exposed to it as well.
Mm-hmm. So who are you?
But I mean, like initially some of these touch girls started their contact work, in the sand pits or on the beach, like taking away that sort of hard fall on the ground, but like just being able to have repetition of contact, and they spend a lot of time just on that basic stuff in a big sand pit essentially. So that was how they sort of became accustomed to the contact side of things.
Who are your biggest influences, Craig, when it comes to athletic development?
Well, I think, especially with a game like Sevens, is like it's so multifaceted mm-hmm. that I get a lot of sort of, I've got influences like from like West Side, like from a strength prescription point of view, West Side Jim Wendler, other weightlifting sort of programs point of view, like their sort of philosophies and processes I definitely follow from that point of view. And then, as I mentioned, Tim Gabbett, Charlie Francis, those other sort of well-known speed coaches around the place at the moment. And that's the beauty of social media, I guess. Like you get exposed to like a whole lot of different influences that like you take bits and pieces from. Bosch is another big sort of running or speed guy. I'm not totally sold on his total philosophy, but definitely there's components of his work that I consider and include in my programming.
So do you, on a kind of bigger scale with regards to kind of the kind of communication and the people side of things, the people skills, is there any influences that you like, books or sites or people, individuals that you look to for that kind of thing?
I guess, I mean, not specifically. Yeah, like okay. It's more just sort of taken from like having a look at the sites around and just like picking bits and pieces here, but no one specifically sort of that I follow and take from. It's sort of bits and pieces here and there, really.
So I'm just conscious of time, and you need to get to work. So where can people keep up to date with what you've got going on? Because you're on Twitter for one. You mentioned there.
Yeah, at Craig Twentyman. But yeah, I mean that's sort of the main. I'm not like a big sort of tweeter, if you like, but I definitely I'd probably follow more than I put out there. But like around tournaments and that, I like to sort of put a few things out there here and there, just to so people can sort of get an inside sort of like look at things. So
just one last thing, what's the kind of week building up to a Dubai or a tournament? How does that differ to like a normal week? So tapering down to a tournament?
Yeah, we have a lot of detail around our planning from that point of view. 3 to 4 weeks from a tournament is very different to what a tournament week looks like, as you say. We found that the traditional sort of captain's run, if you like, or the on feet day prior to a tournament, it wasn't working for us. So we went away from that and structured 2 sessions throughout the week, relatively light. It ends up being about 6 to 8 Ks within activations and like sort of PSS or like personal skills sort of session prior to that first tournament day. So it's fairly light week and like really structured around the work that we've done leading into that. So the 2 to 3 weeks prior, all based like loadings and that are based off those weeks there.
Cool. Well, I definitely will let you go this time because I'm conscious that you need to get off. So just want to thank you for your time and really appreciate you joining us at 6 o'clock in the morning.
No, it's fine, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Great time, mate. Speak to you soon.
Cheers, mate.
See you, pal. Bye.
See you, mate. Bye-bye.
thanks for tuning in to episode 112 of the Pacey Performance Podcast. Such a great episode from Craig. Really want to thank him for his time in certainly a busy schedule. So thanks to Craig for giving up his time, and thanks to you guys for tuning in. So as I mentioned, got a new website coming up in the next couple of weeks, hopefully with some brand new content which will complement the podcast in the form of video, in the form of increased numbers of written articles. So that should be really good, and I'm really excited to kind of present that and bring that to you, and hopefully voice that on the podcast and get some feedback from you guys. So thanks very much for tuning in. Massive thanks to Val Performance again for sponsoring the episode today. I will catch you next week in episode 113.